You're listening to Let's Talk Sustainable Business.
Hi, my name is Barbara Mendes-Jorge and I'm a sustainability communications expert based in Brussels, Belgium. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Let's Talk Sustainable Business, a series brought to you by the Conference Board. This is the second instalment of our two-part conversation with Kenny McGee, Managing Director and CEO of Component Sense. If you haven't listened to part one yet, please do go back into our catalogue to listen to it first. Welcome back, Kenny.
Hello, great to be back.
Thank you for coming back. So, in part one, we talked about how Component Sense focuses on buying and selling surplus electronic components, the state of the e-waste sector, the company's electronic waste manifesto, and the evolution of precious metals recovery in e-waste. So, in part two, I'd love to talk to you about what companies and other stakeholders can do to reduce e-waste and what you'd like policymakers to prioritize. So, Kenny, in the previous episode, I touched upon the WEEE directive, which is the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive, the RoHS directive, that's the restriction of hazardous substances in electrical and electronic equipment, very easy to say. And we also talked about, right to repair, the EU circular economy plan very vaguely. So to begin part two, could I ask you to talk a bit more about how EU policy impacts the work you do and how your business has developed?
Yeah, of course. EU policy, global policy, we obviously have to keep on top of that, be well aware of what's going on and what the next stages are likely to be. But the policy is typically a little bit behind our thinking. I would say that it's very rare we're caught out by anything. The policy is, a little bit behind the times. We're Component Sense. We take a common sense approach to everything that we do. And in terms of waste, we're just trying to make sensible decisions. It's not rocket science. We want to make a difference. We want to help the world. We want to help the planet. We want to clean up waste in the places where we're dumping it. So our long-term goal is to get our billion-dollar clients, so enormous clients that we work with, to just give a little to help make sure that we're not dumping our e-waste on other people's land.
Has developing policy in this area. So I'm thinking, the EU CSRD, ISSB, which is really changing on how companies need to report on sustainability. Do you see that already impacting the conversations you're having with your clients? Are they becoming a bit more kind of aware that they need to do more, or not quite yet, would you say?
No, there's been a big change in the last few years. I don't think it's just policy. I think policy is helping. I think the consumer is demanding better. I think the consumer does drive the manufacturers towards a more sustainable future. But the policy obviously helps too. We just have to be careful we don't create new problems. The RoHS or RoHS directive from 2005 probably created the e-waste dumping abroad. We were no longer allowed to dump e-waste in the UK or in Europe or in America or in Australia, but somehow our e-waste ended up in other countries. So we do need to be careful with policy. It does concern me a little bit. KPIs are the same within business. You create a KPI with a great idea and you want to drive change, and before you know it, people have inadvertently gone off track and start to do things that you really didn't intend. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
I was thinking that's a very important point, that you're saying that it's all very good and well to say that we can't produce it in Europe, but there are other, like you say, there are other locations and other externalities that are maybe not being considered. It reminds me of, again, a previous podcast episode with Marilyn Waite, where we talked about kind of sustainability more general, where there is still this very Western approach to doing it. So just because something doesn't happen in your area doesn't mean it's going to happen somewhere else, and that needs to be considered as well, even if it isn't your immediate location. So I think that's a very good point that that you're making, Kenny. So as the CEO of a company focused on components e-waste, what message would you like to send to European or global British policymakers that are focused on this topic beyond don't make more problems than you set out with to begin with?
Yeah, you just got to think the whole thing through, from start to finish. The Basel Convention, restricts us from shipping electronic waste abroad. So how do we define electronic waste? Because we know the stuff that's getting to Ghana and getting to these wastelands, most of it doesn't work. So to us, that's e-waste. Somehow somebody's getting around that legislation. So the legislation is fine. I guess we need to make sure it's managed properly and adhered to. My personal preference would be to deal with the waste in country. I don't think it should ever be moving. It is challenging because, of course, in poorer countries, they want our second-hand goods because what is waste to us is potentially really useful product to them. But yeah, the vast majority of what we are seeing getting to Ghana is not usable, and people are having to literally cobble together 3 or 4 devices to get one, which means there's a pile of e-waste now in the wrong country.
So yeah, by turbocharging an e-waste sector in your country, that could provide a lot of opportunities, right? Because you're providing jobs within your country, you're dealing with a problem that then the country doesn't have to deal with, and the external countries don't have to deal with either.
Yeah, I mean the cost is the challenge, So our labour costs are very high in comparison, and we don't repair things anymore. When I was young, I'm getting on a bit now. I'm 55. When I was young, you called a TV repairman, and a guy literally came and soldered a new capacitor into your TV, and it was working again. That's just not viable anymore with our labour rates. You can buy a new TV cheaper than you could get the guy to come out and fix your TV. So that's part of the challenge. And again, you did mention they are repairable, devices being more repairable. And that's starting to happen. I was having a conversation a few weeks ago with somebody from Siemens, and they're really making some big changes. GE as well. So there's some big companies really making great efforts to make their own devices more repairable, more sustainable. Siemens were talking about these great big boxes that you'll see in the side of the street sometimes at the base stations to the mobile towers. These base stations are very big pieces of equipment, and they're now thinking, could they make the next generation fit the old box? Rather than replacing this great big steel housing, could they reuse it? And of course they can. It's literally just a slight change in thinking. They're now going to put new electronics into the old casing. Why not? It's a great idea. We're starting to see things like that happening across all sectors. I was literally looking at my mobile phone the other day, and I don't have over the top allegiance to any particular brand, but my phone I prefer to be
All
Apple.
brands are available.
Yeah, but to be fair, my monitor's Samsung, my laptop's LG, my TVs are Samsung. Yeah, I buy all sorts of products. I do love electronics, but we have to be more sustainable if we're going to continue this journey. But yeah, this device changes every year, and they make it 1 or 2 millimeters bigger, which means I can no longer use last year's case. And it occurred to me today that the titanium case that is an iPhone, that's an expensive piece of kit. It's beautiful. That entire case could be reused. You could literally hand it in and have a new iPhone fitted to the old case if they kept it the same size. Do we need it to be 2 millimeters bigger? I doubt it. It doesn't make a lot of difference to me.
Yeah, I mean, when you mentioned that, in the past we used to be able to go to TV repairmans, I guess in this day and age there are such things as repair cafes, right? That definitely seems to have popped up a bit in Brussels, but for electronics, it's a bit more complicated. Obviously, we are not so au fait with how to build an iPhone. Taking a step back, because we discussed kind of consumers, what are your views on extended producer responsibility? Because that shifts then the responsibility of the life cycle to the producer. How do you see that role? How are some of the companies that you're working with dealing with that?
Again, we are seeing improvements in that side of things. We're definitely seeing some changes there. I think it's a great thing. It is a good thing, and it's something I've talked about for a long time. Again, this mobile device in my pocket, I wouldn't care if it cost me $5-10 extra if I knew it was being dealt with at the end properly.
Hmm.
I don't think anybody spending over $1,000 on a phone would care if it cost $10 more. So that just needs to be factored in. If that's factored in from the beginning, and there is a mechanism for recycling, then that would be fantastic. We are hearing, and again, this is partly why I want to go to Ghana and see for myself what is there, what sort of products are landing there. and what products aren't landing there. We've had some insight that certain brands are not present, and that fascinates me because they must be doing something right. So if we can delve into that and find out why is that product not getting to that landfill, delve into that, find out what they're doing, and then share that. Why aren't companies sharing what they're doing from an environmental point of view? Because it is
Yeah.
all of our planet. We want to save the planet.
Yeah.
So
I'm smiling because I'm thinking of a similar example here in Brussels. So there's a canal. We have a canal in Brussels, and there's a canal cleanup program to try and get rid of plastic and other waste. And what they did for a month was identify which brands had the most pollution in the canal, and then they did a report, and they really targeted them to say, look, whoever it was, I think Coca-Cola was probably up there. Your packaging is going into the canal. Are you going to do something about this? And what you're saying there makes sense. Brands absolutely don't want to be involved in that checklist, and I think the people who are not should be championed. Should be championed as kind of sustainability leaders.
yeah, I think that's a great idea.
Yeah. So, presuming that the listeners who are listening to this episode work for companies in the sustainability space, are interested in e-waste, what advice would you give them to reduce their e-waste footprint, whether on a personal or on a company level?
I think it's just a case of being more aware, starting to be more aware of what your decisions are doing, in the long term. Again, I think as humans, we're all prone to focusing on the here and now. I mean, we don't think too far ahead. I was born in a time, kind of, my parents were born just during the war. They were very, very focused on waste. There was no waste. We couldn't waste a bit of food. If there was food in front of us, we had to eat it, and that's lived with me. And I think that's changed. Unfortunately, I think people are very blasé, or can be, about waste in general. So, I'm always on at my kids about having the shower on for too long and wasting hot water. That's energy that's going down the drain, and it's not just the cost of it. It's the environmental impact of that. So yeah, I think we just need to be much, much more focused on the consequences of our actions, all of us. And within a business, you can make a bigger difference because you've got the economies of scale. And that's what we're focused on as a business. Is we want to help these massive companies, these multi-billion-dollar companies, trillion-dollar companies. We want to help them move in that direction. So our job is to make them more aware of the consequences of their actions and encourage them. And we can encourage them by giving them their money back. All this waste that they're going to potentially dump at some point, we can get them all their money back. I went to South Korea years ago to visit a factory that was going to throw out $2.4 million worth of stock, which was
Wow.
1 month's excess. And they didn't want it getting into the hands of their competitor. So it was that competitive environment that made them not want to do the right thing with it. And it's shocking. I mean, as I say, we tend to sell downstream, so it's not going to be direct competitors. Apple's not going to buy Samsung stuff and vice versa, because they're both moving on in technology just as fast as each other. But there's people downstream making less high-tech products that could use those devices for 10 years or more.
And that's another very good point, Kenny. I mean, what has run through both our conversations is kind of collaboration is key. And I mean, not just for e-waste, for getting ourselves out of the climate crisis, for consuming less. And if companies have this very traditional mindset of competitors, I've seen it myself in companies who report on sustainability, they sometimes don't want to be as transparent uh, as they could be because they're worried that their competitors will see and use it to one up them, which is in my mind absolutely insane. Because if you're doing something good or you're trying to do something good, this should be communicated to the rooftops. So hopefully component sense can kind of move the dial in that sense, which again segues nicely into my final question, because I was going to ask you one of my final questions. Sorry, I was going to ask you what plans do you have for the future, and it sounds like you really want to help those companies that have potentially a huge impact to become more sustainable, to consume less.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a big believer in being optimistic. I'm incredibly optimistic. I think we can change the world. We're a relatively small company working with huge companies, and I think we can use that. We know them intimately. We know the inside operations. We know exactly what goes on on site. But we can help them make better decisions, and we can make a big impact with a little bit of help from them. Like I say, a couple of bucks on a phone is all it would cost to make sure we dispose of that product properly. Or we could fund the cleanup in Ghana and other wastelands. We could create jobs in these areas for people, because there is an economy there. People are making money out of this waste. It's a horrible way to make money, but we could create proper jobs there. We could have the kids in school instead of climbing around in this rubbish. There's lots of things we could do, and it doesn't cost a huge amount of money. And the companies that are making these products, they've got enough margin. There's plenty margin. Again, we know what a device costs to make. There's plenty margin in these electronic devices to fund the cleanup, to do it properly, to manage the whole supply chain front to back. And some companies are talking about it. Some are doing it now. It's been slow. It's been really, really slow, but it's starting to happen. And I really do get the sense that companies are coming to the party now. And I'm genuinely excited about it. They're finally talking the same language as us.
Oh, that must feel great after 23 years of being the CEO of your company.
I've hit my head against the brick wall.
or that, you can call it that as well. Are there any particular organizations who you'd like to collaborate with in future, whether that's kind of an ideal client or your network that you'd like to bring together?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Apple's, one of our top clients that we want to work with. Samsung as well. They are the volume users of components. If we could work with both of them and help both of them redistribute stock, is where we can make the most impact. They also do have very high margin products, and I'm sure we could help them make better decisions for the environment.
Wonderful. If you're working for Apple or Samsung, get in touch. We can connect you. To finish off, Kenny, I'd like to ask you, what do you feel is the most important change that needs to happen to make the electronics sector more sustainable?
I think it's happening. I do think it's happening already. The change is coming, and I think it is the younger generation that's pushing it, as consumers and as employees of these large companies. We are hearing much more. I would say early on, maybe 10 years ago, we saw a lot of greenwashing. So there was a CSR department, there was a sustainability
That's one of the
person.
favorite topics of this podcast, and I'm very glad you've brought it up without me saying it. Thank you. Yeah.
So there's a lot of companies that have one person. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. They've got one person that's in charge of CSR. It's madness. But again, as I said, I was talking to Siemens recently. They've got whole departments around it. Every department is talking about it. It's become part of their business and part of their long-term goals. Apple's got very, very challenging goals for 2030. They're really trying to push it now, and we've seen some of the things they've done in the past. I think it was the iWatch, the Apple Watch a year or two ago was infinitely more sustainable than any previous device. It did disappoint me a little. I couldn't get a leather strap, but hey, small sacrifice for the planet. But there's lots of companies now that are making big inroads. I think it's coming. We just need to turn it up a little bit, speed it up, and hopefully we'll be a voice in that conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kenny, for joining us today for part 2. And thanks to our listeners. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to this podcast series and explore the entire catalogue of podcast programming from the Conference Board by visiting our website at tcb.org/podcasts. See you next time.
That was Let's Talk Sustainable Business.